Premiers of Quebec and Ontario have joined forces to try to push the federal government for more help. Here to tell us about their opinions and more about the topic, we were joined by, starting on my far left, Claude Martel, aviation expert. Claude, welcome to the show. Sylvain Laroque from Presse, Damon Van der Linde from the Financial Post, and of course our very own Elias Makos. Claude, I want to start with you because a lot of viewers, I think, they hear the CSeries being tossed around. They're not exactly sure what that program is. Could you just explain what it is, and was it the right choice for Bombardier?
Well, when you talk about a plane, you have to go back about 10 years back, because to develop a plane, it's 15 to 10 years. And 10 years ago, the big market was the price of oil. There were two factors: the price of oil and new ruling by ICAO, which is the UN ruling of aviation, that was talking about emissions, noise, and things like that.
Right.
So there was a need at that time for a new kind of plane that would actually allow a transporter to go in places like London, that was reducing noise and emissions and things like that. So there are a new generation of plane that needed to be created. And Pratt & Whitney created a new motor, and Bombardier decided to create a new plane to fit in that new niche.
Right.
Now, when you develop a plane, you're so far ahead, because it takes so much time to develop one, that there's always one risk: the market will evolve. Now, who would have predicted, like 5 years ago, that the price of oil will go so low? Nobody. Actually, if we find somebody,
and I guess the question is, who should pay for that risk, right?
Yeah.
Business is a risk. Any business is a risk. And I guess now I think a lot of people are saying, well, I guess Bombardier is asking for the Quebec taxpayer to pay for a business risk that a lot of other industries have to face.
Well, Elias, you're a taxpayer.
Yeah.
So do you want to put some of your money into Bombardier?
You know what, for me, at this point, it all is about, and that's why I'm happy we have these experts here, is this a good investment? I know, we hear teachers say, oh, this is ridiculous, we're putting in $1 million, that should go to teacher salaries. But no, if you can invest $1 billion and get back $5 billion, $10 billion, that's a great idea. So, guys, I mean, that's my question. Is this a good investment for Quebec?
Damon, what do you think?
Look, the program has already been started, and if they do not complete it, if Bombardier goes under, this means the entire aerospace industry pretty much in Canada could collapse, and the risk of that is just too great at this point in time. So I don't think that any government could feasibly let this company go under.
Are you saying, Damon, that Bombardier is basically too big to fail? It is too big to fail?
I think a lot of people are saying that. Sylvain, the province has already put in $1.3 billion. Now the premiers of the two largest provinces here in Canada are pushing the federal government to put another $1 billion in. What's your opinion on that?
Well, yeah, as you said, I think it's gonna, it's important for the government to support aerospace. Bombardier doesn't need the money right now. They have all the cash they need with the Quebec investment, with the CASE investment too. But it's the support that's important. It's to comfort customers that might want to buy CSeries and worry that maybe the company is not going to be there in 1 year, 2 years. So the federal government is more like a vote of confidence for the program and reassure customers in the longer term.
And that's a big thing, right? Because if you look at their competitors, Airbus and Boeing, they're stable companies. Or more stable. So, if you're trying to sell planes and you don't appear stable, it's hard to get orders, I guess.
Well, there's a lot of question about the CSeries itself and if it's even going to sell very well. Claude, maybe you can speak on that. Yeah. Do you think it's going to sell?
I think it's going to sell, but it's a question of timing. Like when you're developing a plane, you're always developing for a niche, and the niche might evolve in time. Like, who would have thought the price of petrol would go down? Who would have thought that Iran petrol might go coming into the market? These are all things like 5 years ago nobody could have predicted. But what you were saying was really, really important. Most national companies, whether it's Embraer in Brazil or Airbus in France, Germany, and Britain, or, of course, Boeing in the United States, they heavily support their aerospace industry for one basic reason. It's a huge part of their GDP. Like, aerospace in Quebec is what? Over 10% of the GDP of the whole province. Wow. Yeah. So, and it's all like this, the center point of this is really Bombardier. If you remove Bombardier, Pratt & Whitney might suffer intensively. Tech, you CAE Electronic, right next door to Bombardier. So it's really an ecosystem that you have to support. And once, like, would you, if the oil industry out west would suffer, would you not support it? Would the auto industry?
Look at the auto industry, right? We can make a comparison. You know what we're going to do? We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back on this very topic. We were comparing it perhaps to the auto industry bailout. Sylvain, is it fair to compare this to that particular bailout?
I think so. I think aerospace is as central in Quebec as automobile is in Ontario, so I think the comparison is fair. The federal government and the Ontario government put $13 billion in GM and Chrysler back in 2009, and they lost $3 billion in the operation that they will never recover. So $1 billion for Bombardier is a lot of money, of course, and 1.5 if you convert to Canadian dollars. But compared to the $3 billions of 2009, I mean, you know.
And the way that this company is structured is very unique because it's got a dual class structure. Perhaps, Damon, you can explain to everybody at home exactly what that means.
Right. So in this company, the Bombardier family have special shares where they get more votes than the average shareholder. Like if you were to go and buy shares of Bombardier, you'd only get a small percent of the vote that this family has. So they get 60% of the vote for owning 25% of the company. Basically, that means they get to make all of the big decisions, and shareholders don't have much of a choice. And why this becomes important is because with this, with getting more money, some people are pushing for them to change how the company is structured.
Is that realistic? Could they restructure?
Well, there's a lot of pushback from the company. They certainly don't want it to happen.
Because the big risk is that if those dual shares were to go, I think the risk would be very high that the company could be sold abroad, because now it's really hard for the company to be sold because of those protecting shares.
Well, would they even let that happen? Would the Canadian and Quebec government even let that happen? I know they have a proposal to have 4 of 7 seats on the board of this new entity. I mean, it seems to me if you're going to invest all this money, it seems like you should get something like that back.
But the biggest challenge in here is if Bombardier was bought by, and the only culprit would be Boeing and Airbus, then we would become a secondary outlet, maybe even a part maker for these, and they would start making the planes. If the CSeries was actually something doable, then they would take it and put it in Seattle or in Europe. So it's really important. Like it's part of the economy. It's an economy generator in Quebec and in Canada. So we have to be very extra careful. And I think that's why the Baudouin wanted to have these extra shares to make sure that this would never happen.
Who has the leverage in this situation? Is it the Quebec government, the Canadian government, Bombardier? Because Bombardier.
I think Bombardier does.
I think
they have
like
the leverage.
Right?
Well, because they can't fail. I mean, as Damon said, I mean, if this fails, the consequences are so great for Quebec, for Montreal, and this is an international company as well. We can't forget about that. Sylvain, I wanted to talk a little bit about, a lot of people in the public are saying, if the federal government gives them money, should they be putting in some guarantees? What sort of guarantees should they be putting in?
Yeah, like guarantees in terms of employment.
Exactly.
I think it's hard for any company to commit to any job level. I think it would put them in a hard situation compared to the competition and things like that. The company was not efficient enough. They had to, unfortunately, lay off people. They could maybe commit to a low level of employment, like 10,000 jobs in Quebec or 15,000 jobs. I think they have around 17,000.
And the headquarters, of course, to remain.
And I'm sure they would agree to commit to the headquarters. But I don't think the government should intervene in terms of jobs and things like that.
Should the Quebec government be getting maybe a bit of some of Bombardier's successful businesses? They have a successful recreational products business that makes the Sea-Doos and the Ski-Doos that is profitable. Should the Quebec government say, hey, listen, we're going to give you a lot of money for your C-Series, but can we also get a cut of this business that's already successful to sort of guarantee the back end?
Claude's nodding his head.
That's always a possibility. Like negotiations is only as good as the negotiator. And of course, how much leverage you have. Now, of course, if you look at the other companies like Airbus and Boeing, that the government supports the sales. Like in the latest sale of Embraer, like the Brazil government guaranteed the sales almost to a level that you would go crazy about. So again, we have to be careful. Government in general should support their larger industry to at least support the internal economy and the jobs they support. Now, how much are we willing to do this? And again, last week we were talking that we're right now scrutinizing a business that is doing fairly well. It just has a dry spot, and every aerospace company has dry spot. Boeing had a dry spot with the 777, where they had all kinds of issues. Guess what it is now? It's one of the best sellers.
I want to end with asking this question, and that is, Bombardier, Damon, has come out and they've asked the public, they've asked Quebecers for solidarity because they're getting, it seems to be a bit of a smear campaign here. Do you think Quebecers should show some solidarity in this?
Well, clearly people are allowed to express whatever opinion that they have, but I think here what's important to do is to look at the political aspect of it, where when the opposition, the political opposition, is criticizing the government for giving the subsidy, or sorry, for the investment in the CSeries, did they not negotiate a good deal? I think you have to look at their motivations for doing it. They're a political opposition. Their job is to oppose the government. So can the competition use some sort of disagreement to try and convince other airlines not to buy the product? Absolutely.
It's a good question. We're gonna leave on that thought. Thank you so much, Damon, Sylvain, Claude. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, Elias, my colleague here on Breakfast.